We're absolutely delighted to welcome Alison Scott, who is probably one of the biggest names in British SF fandom, or a corner of it. Alison was, I'm going to get this wrong, Down Under fan?
Going Under fan fund. I'll talk about
Going
that.
Under fund, GUFF.
Yeah. GUFF.
This past year, she has done some amazing stuff in the year of lockdown, and we've basically asked her to come talk about everything she's been doing. And after that, I'm sure she will introduce herself. But for those of you who don't know Alison, Alison is part of the Plokta, which is a fanzine group that have also run conventions and Eastercons and all sorts of things. Alison, over to you.
Hi. Right, yes, as Farah said, thank you, Farah. I'm Alison Scott. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest at Conspire. I was very thrilled, and saw the thing saying, please talk on the subject, my year in virtual fandom. So that's what I'm going to do. Anyone who knows me at all well will know that I am not that great at organising my thoughts or sticking to themes, so I've had a go. Thank you also very much for taking the event virtual, because I think, spoiler, I think virtual events are cool, and I think you can do some things with them that you can't necessarily do with in-person events. So I've really enjoyed today, the bits of today that I've got to, when I wasn't panicking about my speech. I have lined up some things to listen to and watch later. So what I'm going to talk about is my year in virtual fandom. I guess everyone's had a year in virtual fandom, but this is my one. So it's a very kind of self-indulgent talk. Sorry, guys. It starts pretty calendrical. So it's kind of like where I found myself, what I did, why I did it, where I think we might be now, and some things to take forward. And then I'm going to finish with what I reckon, because, you know, what I reckon. So this is me, a bit about me. This is a picture of me by Sue Mason, who is very good at making my ideas into art. Though in fact this is one of her ideas, but it's very much a picture of me. She did the first version of it with all the Apple computers, and then said, "Oh no, I haven't put all the coffee cups in. I have to take it away and put coffee cups in." So now it's got coffee cups. My pronouns are she and her. I run a business called Stow Shirts that's really just me and elves. Elves are my children and the children of my friends who sometimes come and work for me for minimum wage, packing and shipping my badges. Some of my stuff's Spanish, but a lot isn't. An awful lot of it is stuff like this, where I steal jokes from the 1970s and make them relevant to a new age. And I want to say I'm a science fiction fan. Yeah. That's what sort of person I am. And I guess the first step is admitting you have a problem. Right. I'm not really a fan of, I mean, I do read science fiction and I read fantasy and I watch science fiction films and television, but I complain about it a lot. I'm really a fan of fandom. I like hanging out with science fiction fans, and I think they're interesting, and I think they have a lot of interesting ideas, and I like to do stuff that involves bringing science fiction fans together to talk about the things that they're interested in, which might or might not be Spanish. And I used to have another big hobby as well, which was folk music, but because it turned out that in folk music, what I liked was to bring lots of people together who might not be particularly good at playing music, but kind of enjoyed it and had fun doing it. That's especially, I like singing loudly and quite badly in bars with a lot of beer, and that hasn't come back yet, so that's a thing that oh, and I'm not checking the chat, so I think Farah's moderating. Farah, can you pick interesting questions out of the chat, and I'll read all the chat at the end while I'm thinking.
I will. Sadly, at the moment it's links. John is putting links in for you as you speak.
Oh, whoa, what a star. I've actually got a set of links ready to paste into the chat at the end of the talk, but yeah. So, but if John does that for me first, that's lovely. So I do, so a lot of my stuff is fanish rather than professionally engaged with science fiction, though science fiction fans do in various ways help me generate income. So I do make some money off you. And so what happened, it's actually been a little bit more than a year. It's about 15 months I'm going to cover. And I'm going to start with February, where I got very worried earlier than most, and I started posting memes about how worried I was. This is the sort of thing. This is this is First Dog on the Moon saying, comparing the coronavirus spike with the flattened coronavirus spike with climate change. So I did a lot of this sort of thing, to the extent that I now have a special filter on Facebook for my friends who don't want to see any of my coronavirus graphs. So I got worried first. I got worried. I maybe didn't worry enough and hard enough, but I did get worried. And I, in particular, I dealt with getting worried the way that I do, which is that I went to PikaCon last year and got really pissed. That's pissed in the British sense, as in I drank 4 pints of ale and then told everyone that the world was about to end quite loudly until they started throwing peanuts at me. And my takeaway from February, I may have takeaways from every month, but I'm not sure. My takeaway from February is you should listen to your historian friends because they know shit. And my historian friends told me about historic plagues. And from that, I learned that things were bad. And then in March, we shut down. We went. My last social engagement with you guys was the first Thursday meeting in March, where we all kind of we all did our normal stuff. We basically went to the pub and got drunk and talked about how we weren't going to touch each other in, whilst 30 of us were in a small upstairs room with very poor ventilation in March. So, and in fact, somebody at that pub had caught coronavirus that day. So, there's a thing. So we went to the pub and then we shut down. And about 2 weeks into that, a bit late, around about then, Lillian Edwards, and this part of this theme of this is picking up on what other people say to you. Lillian said, wouldn't it be nice if we had chat every morning on Zoom for people so that everyone could make sure that they'd got up and got dressed and were actually getting on with their day, because otherwise it would be too easy to spend the entire day in your pajamas playing video games. And I went, I mean, not Lillian, because I'm sure Lillian doesn't play video games. And I said, that sounds great, Lillian. How about 9 o'clock? And we compromised on 10:30, but it turned out that 10:30 was far too early for Lillian. But I have carried on those meetings. And at some point they got called Cafe Moose. Now, technically this is for my pals, but I have quite a broad definition of pals. So if you think that hanging out with people in the morning, even occasionally, might be something that would cheer you up, get in touch. And I will tell you how to come to Cafe Moose. We meet, now that we have art, we meet Monday to Friday at 10:30 and on Thursday at 5 o'clock. And that is called Boozy Moose. I have a picture for that as well, Boozy Moose. But generally we're Cafe Moose. And that really is the start of all of this, because it turned out that I am a raging extrovert. I had not known this. I mean, I had known this, but I really need to hang out with my friends in order to have fun. So this was it, hanging out with my friends. And quite a big definition of friends. I'll talk about that in a bit later as well. So this is my other Cafe Moose picture. This is what the cafe looks like. This is Fiona Moore's extremely beautiful miniature cafe. And you'll see it's got moose art, and I don't know, you may need to zoom in on your giant monitors here, but it has moose art and it has fanzines and other fanish paraphernalia looking around, and the entire thing is about yay big. So the woman's a wonder, but I love that she made our cafe. I did spend a lot of time in my pajamas playing video games, and as evidence of that, I have the kitchen of my Animal Crossing home, which has been carefully set up. It is full of turnips. I made this as a joke. I put on Facebook, turnips, has anyone got any recipes for turnips? And it was an Animal Crossing joke, but everyone was like, recipes for turnips. So if you don't understand that, then you should play more Animal Crossing. It's a very good way to pass the time, particularly if you're locked down. So that was March. The other thing, I did 2 other things in March. The other one is John Coxon, who is the person who is, I think, typing things into chat on my behalf. Yeah, and John messaged me and said, you remember about 3 months ago, we talked about starting a podcast together. And I said, yeah, that sounds, I remember that. He was like, right, well, now we're locked down. Why don't we actually do it? Let me and it is called Octothorpe. And I think John's probably already pasted that in, but I do Octothorpe once a fortnight with John and with Liz Batty. And John does all the work. I think it's fair to say we just kind of turn up and are endlessly entertaining. But you can listen to our podcast. We have dozens of regular listeners at this point. And towards the end of March, somebody said, oh, what are we going to do about the first Thursday meeting? Because can we take it virtual? And I knew, because of, probably not from Cafe Moose, but I think probably sort of from Cafe Moose, that Zoom meetings got a bit unwieldy if you have more than about 10 people in them. And I thought about the first Thursday and about how people behaved in a pub, and they kind of move around. And I concluded that what we needed to do was set up Zoom breakout rooms. I didn't really know anything about, I'd used Zoom professionally a couple of times. I didn't really know anything about it. But I kind of drew a picture of what, this is a top-down view of the upstairs room in the Bishop's Finger, with a terrible carpet and some extremely old wooden tables. And I thought, well, if we kind of name the tables 1 to 8, people can go and sit where they would sit in the pub. This didn't really work at all. It turns out that the way that people move around in virtual environments is completely different from the way they would move. But we had a meeting and it was kind of okay. And Zoom, which is still doing its thing, still best in class, did for us, and we've carried on having those meetings. So if you're in London, then they're just kind of like the upstairs room at the Bishop's Finger, except online. Not everybody comes. We've done some work to try and get people along. But we do have people who are kind of like, I don't really like that sort of thing. So, you know, they might, there are more things we can do, I think, but I don't know whether we'll need to. With a bit of luck, we'll come out of pandemic soon. And then about this time, there was also Eastercon, and I was massively disappointed by Eastercon 2020 because they were in a very, very difficult position. So I had a lot of sympathy for that. And they decided not to run any program or social events themselves, but to have just have the business meeting. But unfortunately, they didn't actually tell us they were going to do that until about 5 or 6 days before the convention, which was a bit too late to organise program. It was fine for organising parties, and in fact, I had a party at Eastercon, and a couple of other people had parties. So there was at least one party every night at Eastercon that you could go to. So we kind of made up for it that way. But that you don't. Conventions are a combination of the program space and the social space, and in order to make something work effectively as a convention, you need to do both. Just doing the program won't work because everybody falls out of program and goes, okay, so now what? I'm back in my home again. I can have a cup of tea, but that's not really what I want. And you can't, if you just do the social stuff, then eventually people are like, well, yeah, I've just spent the entire, am I going to spend a whole weekend chatting on Zoom? What you need some content to support those discussions. So at Easter, I discovered I'd won GUFF. I don't know what I should say here. I'd always intended to run for GUFF in 2020, and then I heard that a friend of mine was running. And I thought, well, I'm not going to run if a friend of mine is running. I will, not just a kind of, but somebody I saw fairly regularly. I will leave it. They're a very good candidate. And then I discovered that they had pulled out. So I basically entered the GUFF race at almost the last minute. But at the time I entered, which was, the beginning of January, I had no idea that I wasn't going to be able to go to Australia and New Zealand. GUFF is the Going Under Fan Fund. So that was announced, and then just shortly after that, New Zealand announced it was going virtual, and I went. I need to credit my a neighbour of mine who has 4 children, and in the Easter holidays they were due to go to the Caribbean, and their Caribbean holiday, like that they'd been saving up for forever, got cancelled. And what she did was she put the kids in the garden with iPads hung on their backs and simulated the experience of being on a transatlantic flight. Here is a picture of it. And they then had cocktails in the garden as if they were in, I don't know, the Bahamas. I don't know where in the Caribbean they were planning to go, I've forgotten. But they kind of did lots of things. I thought, oh, that's a really funny, you could have a virtual trip. I will do a virtual trip. So I did a virtual trip, and I met loads and loads of Australian and New Zealand fans. Rob Jackson said, a GUFF, I keep quoting this, he's probably very fed up of me, but this is the frontispiece for my virtual trip report. A GUFF / Duff trip. GUFF is going under Fan Fund. It takes a British fan or a European fan to Australia and New Zealand. Duff does the equivalent for North America. So Erin Underwood, who also ran Boscone, is the current Duff delegate, and like me, she went to Conzealand virtually. It isn't much of a trip if you just sit in front of your computer at home. So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to prove that Rob is wrong. What things can I do? And I did lots of things. I had meetups all over Australia and New Zealand with fans. I bought a VR rig, an Oculus Quest, so that I could play video games in lockdown. And I thought, well, maybe I could watch some video of places in Australia and New Zealand. And that turned out to be amazing. It feels like being there. The best of these videos are completely compelling. It's so much fun. You can only do it for a little bit a day because you start getting woozy, but it is amazing. This is a picture from a previous slide deck, and I couldn't find the original picture, but this is the picture I did of me on a plane. I had any choice of plane in the world, so I went first class on Qantas to Australia in my non-existent trip. And then I sketched lots of pictures. These are mostly pretty bad. And I have postcards that are made from these. So I have many Australian and New Zealand scenes, and this is all of the stuff that is going to be in my trip report, which will be available when I've finished it. It may be the first trip report that doesn't have any words in it. And I think there's some reasons why it doesn't have any words, which I will get to. Oh, I wanted to talk about a couple of other things that happened, because I thought that my trip was pretty creative, but I wanted to talk about two other creative things that other people did last summer. The first is that long ago, Tony Keane, who I think is in this session, made himself a tiny model Tony at a railway show, I think. And he bought one to put in his model railway thing, but other people have also bought tiny Tonys. And Mark Slater posted a picture of tiny Tony engaged in exciting fanish adventures every day last summer. And I thought that was a very good example of what you could do creatively. And the other thing was that I have a neighbor who makes street art, and she does large scale projects with the community. And she couldn't do any of that. So she gave lots of little bits of clay tile to local families and said, make designs in these and then give them back to me, and I will fire them and turn them into my giant brambles. So these are ours. There are all sorts of personal jokes contained in these. They have things that are important to me impressed into them. And this is us going down to Maud's studio and helping out with the actual process of making the Walthamstow Central. I live in Walthamstow, Roundel. And this is the actual roundel. And so this is an example where she was obviously in a position where she couldn't, that was the one we worked on, she couldn't do the normal things she did, but she found a way to do it, maybe even better because of the constraints. So I know that's not fanish, but I just wanted to digress a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about fandom and constraints. I might not have time because I'm going to run out of some stuff. And then I ran a convention. This is also John Coxon and Liz Batty, but this case also Steve Davis, and then the second one, additionally Claire Brawley. And Novacon did a thing that Eastercon hadn't. So Novacon, which is the second UK convention, said well before Novacon, we are not going to run it virtually. If we cannot run a physical convention, we're not going to run one at all. And that gave us a motive to run an online convention. And somebody said about Punctuation too, which was last weekend, that Punctuation is the only online con that doesn't treat being an online con as a consolation prize. And although I'm quite proud of what we've done with Punctuation, it is absolutely a consolation prize. We deliberately put it into the Novacon weekend as a consolation prize for people who couldn't go to Novacon. And we deliberately did a load of things that reflected and were like some of the things you might have done at Novacon if you had been there. But obviously you can't do all of them. So yeah, I haven't got a slide for, so I do have a few slides for Punctuation. Oh yeah, I've got a lot of slides about ribbons. We'll go on to ribbons in a bit. I also got involved in Discord because, and I think there's a sort of chain of how all of these things came out of each other. The online conventions worked out, as well as using virtual conferences, video conferencing systems, they could support themselves with a Discord, or you could also do it in Slack, but with a kind of corporate messaging environment. Discord is not corporate, but it's designed for groups of gamers, but it does the same thing. It creates a chat space and a space where people can hang out together in a rather less always on way than Zoom is. And so Punctuation had a Discord, and as a result of Punctuation, we started a Discord server for people who are kind of British science fiction fans and friends of British science fiction fans. So it feels to me that almost everybody at this conference would be welcome in Anonymous Claire, which is the name of the server. That's a joke based on an online service called LiveJournal Ask Your Grandmother. Right. So the thing about Discord is that it provides some community space, and at the moment Discord's not evil. I mean, it might become evil, but it's not evil at the moment. Yeah. So what else have I been doing? I then learned how to make tissue paper stained glass. This is about working within constraints. I normally carve a pumpkin for Halloween, and I couldn't carve a pumpkin for Halloween because people weren't coming to the door, and I didn't want to do anything that would encourage people to come to the door. So I thought, well, window decorations are a good example of something that doesn't encourage people to come to the door. So I made window decorations, and I then made more window decorations at Christmas time. I've got a couple of pictures of these. Yeah, lots of them. This was probably stupid. This is St. Octothorpe. This is my, say, pièce de résistance tissue paper window. Do not do this. This is insane. Do not make windows out of, stained glass windows out of tissue paper. There's just 1,000 reasons why it's a very bad idea. St. Octothorpe is delivering Weetabix to the poor children of Walthamstow. This has Walthamstow sites on it and 8 moose who are called comma and dash and colon and other, and apostrophe and things of that sort. So another thing I did, this time I had help. I could not do this by myself. We thought it would be nice to have a New Year's party, because normally at New Year's I like to get together with a load of people and drink. Might be a theme there. But I thought it would be quite fun to have a New Year party. We might do this year at New Year as well, I don't know. And I enlisted the help of Karen Schaefer and Mike Ward, who are in California, because I knew that I was not going to be awake for 24 hours. So we started our party in time for, I discovered a lot of interesting things while doing this. We had about 300 people in total, which is quite a lot. lots of Zoom rooms again, lots of breakout rooms. I discovered that it takes more than 24 hours to celebrate the New Year everywhere in the world, which really surprised me. I had not realized, but it's a function of daylight savings time. So it's summer in New Zealand, so they're an hour ahead. So they celebrate New Year 25 hours before Hawaii does. And we were there for both New Zealand and Hawaii. But that was kind of really, that was something that I had never, they say there are some things that only personal experience can give you, but that was it. So we had lots of help. Somebody thought it would be fun to watch fireworks from cities that were having firework displays. It turns out that there are some time zones that do not have public firework displays on New Year's Eve. There aren't that many, but there's kind of a batch in the kind of mid-Atlantic, and there's a few that, and then again, when you want to, there's not that much stuff between California and Alaska and Hawaii. So there's some space there as well, but I was asleep there, so I wouldn't necessarily know. But that was something where we actually did do the trick of bringing people together around the world. And I did have a few personal friends who weren't science fiction fans of that one, but they were mostly science fiction fans around the world. So what should I do after that? I apparently didn't do anything early this year, which seems quite odd to me, but maybe I just kind of slept. I did go to PikaCon, and this is a picture. I was going to put a video in here, but I'm sparing you, but I have got a link. So we learned from PikaCon, lots of other conventions have been doing some fantastic things. We have picked up ideas from cons around the world and have stolen them. And one of the ones we picked up from PikaCon was, PikaCon had a fantastic scavenger hunt. And one of the things in the scavenger hunt was to do a barbershop quartet, which is quite hard over Zoom. And I did this, I did two, in fact, all by myself. I have never done barbershop. I've scarcely even sung harmony. This was very strange. But there's a link to both of them, to the barbershop quartet and to the barbershop quartet in the style of William Shatner. And then we had Eastercon this year, and I did a few things at Eastercon that I want to talk about. So one of the things about this year is that I've had some new collaboration groups. It has thrown up my friendship groups. I've made new friends who weren't particularly good friends at the beginning of the year, but are now great friends. I've re-established old friendships. Some of my other friendship groups have kind of dissipated a little bit. I mean, I think they'll be back. I think it's fine. I've made a load of new week ties. So I have met more new people and made more new friends than any time since I left uni. So this is amazing. If you're middle-aged, then you're in a time in your life when normally your networks are kind of closing in on you a bit, and you find that your life is running in very well-worn grooves, and I just don't think that's happened at all this year. I think I've done loads of new things, but I did do the Eastercon newsletter with the people I always do Eastercon newsletters with, more or less in exactly the same way that we all have always done it, more or less. Our entire workflow has been on the internet for more than a decade. So I, in 2010, I didn't go to the Worldcon in Australia, but I did edit a couple of issues of the newsletter from Walthamstow while the people in Australia were asleep. So we already knew that we could do this without actually having to be physically in the same location. Would it be more fun if we had? Probably would have been. I was also given the Doc Weir Award, which is very nice. And I discovered afterwards that there's a certificate. I never knew there was a certificate. So Eddie Jones made an award, a certificate for the first Doc Weir Award. And these have kind of fallen into disuse, but I now have a blank, and I've taken the word association off this certificate. Sorry, guys. And I think it's kind of amazing that the term either the term or the concept of cyberspace had not been envisaged at the point where Eddie Jones designed this certificate. And now I could put in 2021 that the National Convention was held in cyberspace. I think that's very cool. And I got the Doc Weir, for which I am very, very pleased. That was lovely. Thank you all very much indeed. And the other thing has nothing to do with me, which is that they had a kind of baking competition at Eastercon. I think a baking competition is a great idea. But then I saw the winner of the baking competition, and I was just like, oh, this is like sourdough. So somebody has taken their sourdough art to the next level. And I should have credit for this, but I just found it when I was looking it up. I thought, oh yeah, you guys need to see that. So yes, and then we did punctuation too. I want to say something about the badges, because I love badges. This time, the first time I did them all by hand. Don't do this. The second time, James Shields, who is a very clever boy, took the badge design and put everybody's details and also put everybody's houses onto them. So you should have got a badge with your house. I spent a lot of time doing ribbons. I've been making a lot of, I'm not sure what use virtual ribbons are, but I think they're a lot of fun to make. I may have to actually get ribbons printed in the future a lot. This is for people who are on the Muck Protection Committee, they're muck protectors. This is for people who got their second vaccination and still didn't get a sticker. This is for people who like geese, and for people who like Photoshop, and for people who like jigsaws, and for people who like Doctor Who. Right. So punctuation 2, we did it last weekend. We've learned a lot. We did not use any proximity chat. Whenever we talk about online activity, there's some discussion about whether we use proximity chat, which is where you have a kind of geographical area that people wander around, and then they form their conversational groups naturally as they're wandering. And it is theoretically very good. In practice, I think somebody at the tabletop session that I was at earlier talked about the problems of the sound all coming from the same place. That's worse in proximity chat. So the audio, it's really, at the moment, it's not there for audio. So I haven't used it yet for a big event. I've kind of run some test sessions in it. I've been to a couple of conferences, not science fiction conventions, that have primarily used proximity chat and not really found it worked quite enough for me. I feel like there may be something just around the corner. If you use a if you use a VR rig, you get the spatial is worked out for you. So you're in a space where you can actually see people and hear them as they would be in real life. The only problem is that your avatar looks like a disembodied figure. It doesn't necessarily look like you. And we don't really, at the moment, we don't have enough people. We've managed to get 5 people to one of our meetups. One of my other interests is stereophotography, and they do get quite a lot of people into their VR meetups, and they are pretty good. But again, both these things have quite high costs to entry, whereas we know that Zoom, although you do need some bandwidth, the actual technical requirement for Zoom is very small. I ran Zoom last weekend for the otters that were doing our auto transcription. I ran that using a 9-year-old tablet, so you can actually get on Zoom with quite simple stuff. We did a scavenger hunt of punctuation 2, and I'm really just putting this in because Esther McCallum Stewart made 9 costumes for we asked people in the scavenger hunt to recreate our logo, and Esther made 9 costumes for the 9 elements of the logo, and here they all are pasted onto the logo. I thought that was extraordinary. And then I also pasted on the closing ceremony. This is everyone who had their camera turned on at the closing ceremony, which is about, I don't know, 56, 58 of you, something like. There are more than 2 people in some of those pictures. The other thing we did at Punctuation quite a lot was cheese. This is not me, this is eating cheese. So it turns out that we like to have chat, but it's not just chat. We like to have chat that's got something toothy. So chatting over food and drink is really important, and it's something that we've really missed. But actually having meals together doesn't seem to really work very well online for most people, but kind of nibbling your way through a pound of cheese apparently works quite well. We also did a gin tasting. That was Anna Raftery's idea. Oh, that worked really well. Turns out gin good, and we had a beer tasting, and I think next time we're going to get some chocolate lists up. So if you have ideas for more tasting events, do let us next time. We don't know what we're going to do, but we may never need to. So I wanted to finish by doing some reflecting. I did some things just before. This is Seneca, and I read some Seneca, who was a Stoic, about anger. And I've always been an extremely angry person. I'm probably still quite irritable, but I'm trying to do better. And I have now tried to give up anger, in particular to give up rage, and to start, when I start to experience anger, thinking about, well, what is causing your anger, and what can you do about it? So there's some stuff here about everybody's really irritable at the moment. So I am going to recommend Linus Pauling's version of the Golden Rule, which is do 25% better than you would be done by to allow for observer bias. So yeah, try and give people the benefit of the doubt. Spotting the use that anger represents your aroused response to something that needs changing in your environment, and get that thing changed where you can. Now, obviously, we're not going to change the pandemic. But we are seeing, and I think we're still seeing, everybody being really tetchy and not necessarily making as many allowances for what's going on with other people. Yeah, oh, I need to credit this picture, which is by Callidius on Wikimedia. So thank you very much. That is Seneca. I like this particular one because it's only from about 150 years after he died. So it's probably quite accurate in the way that deviant art pictures of Victorians are. You know, it's like, you know, like maybe it's as accurate as a picture as Benedict Cumberbatch playing Sherlock Holmes, that sort of thing. I was told your mum is the sort of person, this is me, who shouts at remotes. So apparently I am still quite angry. I'm trying to be better though. Constraints make really good art. So looking back at the art I've made over the last year, and not all of it is finished, but when you are forced by circumstances to limit what you're doing, it helps you make better things. When we are limited by circumstances, we should take the opportunity to use those limitations to make good art. I stopped reading news. I went from being a person who was like obsessively doom scrolling to somebody who just patches the news into tiny little chunks of the day so that I have more time for things like music, art, and hanging out with my mates and drinking beer, because I think those things are more important. And I think that if you take the news and you go, oh no, instead of listening to what's happening all the time, I will spend some time once a week reading more in-depth news. I think that is better for us. Yeah, weak ties. So the thing about all my online friends is that I wanted to maintain lots and lots and lots of weak ties. And we're now seeing research that one of the things that the pandemic has done is that people have kind of created online groups with the 10 people they knew best, but it's the other 1,000 people you know, and you're not getting those interactions, and they are a huge source of richness in your life. So do it. Science Fiction Fandom is a good place for all this stuff because we have always been a global community, and we actually have the fan history. We have history of the times when, if you wanted to talk to people about science fiction, if you're interested in SF and you wanted to talk to people about it, the only way you could do that was in writing, because nobody living where you are knew anything about this stuff. And I think that experience makes it easier to form these online communities. It turns out that science fiction fandom also includes a vast number of raging technophobes. I don't personally understand this, and I am quite surprised by it. I'm surprised by people who were like, oh gosh, wow, oh boy, 40 or 50 years later, turned into people who are like, I am not sure how to get my phone to send photographs to my computer. And so that, but what this actually means is that your older friends, this happens to you all, it's probably coming to me. I'm hoping it hasn't come to me yet. I am trying to cure it by using words that are only defined in Urban Dictionary, because apparently that keeps you young. Yeah, but I don't know. I think it comes to everybody. So if you know older people who are having trouble with all of this, then do. So Farah's just told me that she's been shut down. She's been thrown out of the Zoom. So I may have to take my own questions if there are any, and a couple of takeaways. So it turns out I was a futurist, not for science fiction historians in the audience, a small f futurist, not a big F futurist. But I am somebody who has been very excited always about living in the future. I love the fact that this year we've had the opportunity to live in the future. Might not have been the future we were expecting to have. And some takeaways for virtual events, the key one of which is, if you are organising an online event, we know that the reason that you brought people together for events, for all sorts of events, was not just about the ostensible subject of the event. It was about the side conversations, the alternate sessions, the socialisation that went on around those events. When you are in the physical world, the infrastructure to cause those discussions to happen, the bars, restaurants, cafes, parks, tourist attractions, diversions, it's all there already. In the virtual space, none of it is there. You have to design all of it. So if you're organizing an online event, this could be as simple as your gaming night or your family gathering, you need to think about not just the main part of the program and the main part of the structure, but all of the other things that go into it, about creating opportunities in lots of different ways for people to form the exciting and random connections. So at the moment, it's not obvious at all how to do that. So people will leave your talk absolutely aching to talk to you about it, but not necessarily, and actually I've just pointed out, not necessarily wanting to talk to you about it. Sometimes, especially for introverts, what they really, really want to do is listen to people who they know chatting about the thing they've just heard without necessarily having to do any of the chatting themselves, but to actually absorb lots of different thoughts on the subject, which aren't just from the experts. But we've often got no way to do that. And it turns out that just dropping everybody into a single Zoom room and calling it the bar doesn't quite work. You have to do a bit more than that. So think about it, design it in from the beginning. If you're organizing events, if you're organizing professional events, almost every event I go to has people talking about the fact that they're not getting this sort of contact, but you can get a lot more of it that you think you can if you design it in. I think that's about most of it. I've got, what does the future hold? Here's some things I want to do next. I want to visit my pals and sit around with them drinking healthy fruit drinks, like passion fruit margaritas. I want to pub my fanzine because I haven't done that for a while. I really do want to go to a convention and some lessons for the future. Yeah, people like doing things in different ways, so help them do things in lots of different ways. Some people have very poor kit, help them. Some people like virtual stuff better, or I think aspects of virtual stuff. And I think we could do a lot more about creating events that pull some of the full hybrid events are hard, but creating things that pull some of the best practice from virtual events into the future. You could have some virtual events at your physical convention. You could have some virtual guests, especially guests who could not come to your convention for reasons of distance or economics or political reasons or frailty and disability. All of these reasons, you could broaden the diversity and scope of your event by doing this. That's almost everything. Yeah.
Alison, I did get kicked out, so you might have picked this up. But Ruth Booth asked a question. Did you see that one?
I have not seen any of the questions. So what I was going to do is say, I think that's everything I want to say. So have events, have virtual events while we are, have physical events later. Oh, come to Cafe Moose. I was trying to organise an after party after this, but I'm not sure how straightforward that's going to be. So this is my call to the organisers. Please have an after party after Conspire is finished, which is after Tanya's talk. And there's just time for some questions. So what questions have we got, if any?
Okay, so the first one that came up was from Ruth Booth. I'm relatively new to organised fandom, especially the notion of GUFF. If COVID had never happened, would you have been involved in such creative approaches to recording your experiences?
Well, I have some specific examples about my personal creativity. So the first is, I mentioned one in the talk, that John Coxon and I have been talking about doing a podcast for 3 or 4 months, and we might have got around to it. But we've now done like 34 episodes, and it's a good podcast. I mean, it's one of these podcasts that doesn't have experts on it. It's just us talking about what we reckon. John and Liz and I talking about what we reckon for an hour once a fortnight. It's very good to put on while you're doing the gardening or things of that kind. You know, it's that sort of podcast. Like being in the pub with your noisy mates. Your speech at the Confusion, have I had any pushback? I haven't. I still have. If Vanessa's in the audience, I still want to, let's meet. Vanessa wasn't Punctuation, and as were her team for 2023. So I want to kind of have a chat with them about some of the things I wrote and what they're doing about it. I still think physical conventions need to be working on thinking about how they can hybridize to some extent. Yeah, especially the Eastercon, where we know we've got members of our community who attended Eastercon every year and probably aren't going to be able to again now. Yeah. So yes. Joe Walton, I love the early Vector editorials that are like, here's my address, come round on Fridays. It's really, we've kind of lost this. We kind of don't put our address on the internet so much anymore because world complexity. My address is publicly available on the internet for, you know, if you have any kind of ability to Google at all, it's not at all hard to find because I've lived here for over 20 years and I've been doing fanzines out of that address for most of that time. So, and they have my address in. Our cheese is gone. I miss it. Yeah, no, I miss my cheese too. So I think other questions or?
Yes, I have one.
And Mayor.
Yes. Now, John, despite his help, attempted to get me in this morning and gave me lots of advice, but I didn't get in this morning. And you have given me no advice at all, and here I am enjoying your talk. Thank you very much. And tell John that we must try harder next time.
We did try to get people. I mean, one of the things about this is that it's a process. So I was talking about us having quite a lot of elderly fans. The more things we do, the more we are engaging a little bit each time. So we're seeing each time people coming along and coping and learning how to use new technology, and some of them just take it to
apparently it's because I was already in Discord that I couldn't get into you.
It was all because that was so sorry. So one of the things that happened with Punctuation and we really didn't. I didn't think about. So Eastercon used Gather, which is a a proximity chat system where you kind of walk around as if you were in a video game from the 90s. And I spent the whole of the 1990 playing video games. So this was all very familiar to me. But it turns out that some people aren't familiar.
No, I could see you and you couldn't see me. I was up in the top left corner. I was one of 5 people in the Discord voice.
Anne, do you have an actual question for Alison about her talk? Because this seems to be a question about technical advice, and this isn't really the place for it.
No, what I wanted was not the place for that. I wanted the place for her to give a message to John that although she didn't have to do anything, it worked. And he had done a lot of trying and it didn't.
Okay, should we move on? Has anybody got another question?
Phil Dyson has asked me, I thought the Cafe Moose picture was from the Roslin Cafe in Northern Exposure. The Cafe Moose picture is a pastiche, is a Photoshop pastiche of the Roslin Cafe art, which I did for Cafe Moose. So that's why it's familiar. It is familiar and yet different. So it is a pastiche of it. Yeah, going back to, I've done more stuff this year because of COVID in fandom than I would have done if it hadn't been, because I lost folk music. So I basically had twice as much time for fandom. So I think that's the, and half as much time for folk music. I've kept up with my music, with my instrument playing, but that's all. I haven't done any singing for a year. Apart from the barbershop quartet at Peakacod.
Alison, did any of the folk music groups go online?
Yeah, so sort of. So there's a series of concerts called Live to Your Living Room, which is essentially Zoom concerts. And then some folk musicians have done individual Zoom concerts. So they are out there, that stuff is out there. You cannot sing at the same time as somebody else on Zoom. Okay? So you can have one person who's like, you can have a band on and you can mute yourself and sing along. Or you can have 2 people. I think Piers Corley does an excellent series of evening concerts where he gets one person in and they just sort of chat and swap songs. So one person will sing a song and then the other person will sing a song. And they are great. But I'm kind of like, this is a kind of, if you like that sort of thing, it turns out that what I wanted from folk music was the experience of singing and playing in a group together, quite casually. And that's the thing that we've lost. So, I mean, hopefully it'll be back, but it isn't back yet. Singing's going to be the last thing to come back. So, yeah.
There's a question from Joe. You mentioned earlier things we can learn and take forward into post-COVID times. And you've already talked about it a bit, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this stuff about working individually with people to enable for them what will help them enjoy our events, because I think that's probably just as true for physical events. And I think that what happens with physical events is that people kind of go, well, that's a known quantity, and if I can't do it, it's just completely inaccessible to me. Whereas what we're seeing with the virtual events is that we get quite a lot of stuff that is partially accessible. So we have people who can use Discord but not Zoom. We can have people who can use Zoom but can't actually engage on video and things like that. And I think helping people, we could probably do more to say, well, how can people partially engage with things or engage in the way that suits them for our physical events as well than we're doing at the moment. Yeah. And Todd has just come along, so it's probably time for me
to
wrap up.
Exactly that.
Thank you very much for helping me organise my thoughts, not necessarily very well on all of this. And
thank you.
And I'll see you in the bar later if there's a bar later to see you in.
And
I have a set of links somewhere. I don't know if John posted them all already, but I had a set of links attached to my thing that I can put in. So you can cut and paste this out and put it somewhere else, guys.
Okay, and while Alison is doing that, if you go to your reactions and search for beer, you will find plenty of icons of beer. So may I suggest that rather than the conventional applause, we all offer a beer icon in lieu of the drinks we will buy Alison when we next see her. Thank you very much, Alison.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And the recording there.